Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before starting, I'd like to say the Communist Workers' Organisation does welcome this chance to debate with the SPGB, and contrary to what I'm going to say and all the rest of what I've got to say, the CWO does actually share quite a number of positions with the SPGB. One of them is namely what socialism is, and we would agree with what the last speakers put forward as to what socialism is. Other positions which we do share with the SPGB is their rejection today of reformism and of state capitalism and their condemnation of leftism. However, we spring from an entirely different tradition. We spring from the left communist tradition. We're a group which has come from the Italian left, who were expelled from the Comintern, regrouped in exile, and formed the Internationalist Communist Party in 1943 in Italy. And these differences, the differences which are between us, are very fundamental and serious ones. Some of them have been mentioned by the last speaker, but before starting, I just want to mention three differences which are programmatic differences. They're about how socialism is to be achieved. Firstly, the SPGB thinks that socialism can be achieved through Parliament, that an election can produce a majority which can legislate capitalism away peacefully. Secondly is the matter which the last speakers touched on, the nature of the party under between now and between when socialism is achieved. The SPGB believe that the role of the party is simply propagandistic, and they are just going to argue the case for socialism, and that is basically all they have to do. We believe it's the role of the party to give a practical and political lead in the struggle for communism. And thirdly, another point which was mentioned by the last speaker is that the SPGB thinks there's no need for a transition period between the present society and communist society. They think communist society can be established overnight after this famous election, about which we'll hear more later. Two other things follow from this. The attitude of the SPGB towards class struggle, which is essentially an abstentionist attitude, that this is not an essential part of the struggle for socialism, it's a diversion. And secondly, their attitude towards war, which is a pacifist attitude. Now, other speakers will take up these points. I'm only mentioning them at the beginning because we think these are very serious differences, which, in our opinion, will probably lead the SPGB to play a reactionary role in the revolutionary period, probably a counter-revolutionary role. What's the basis, the common basis of all these errors? Now, we think that the common basis of these is the SPGB's understanding of the way consciousness develops. And we think, and we will argue tonight, that this is an idealistic understanding. Just to illustrate this, I wish to look briefly at the position on Parliament, the idea that socialism can be achieved through Parliament. The socialist society will become about, we are told, through arguing, through the SPGB propagandizing, arguing the case for socialism. Something, incidentally, they've been doing for the last 80 years without much success, but I'm not saying that's an argument against what we're saying. We want to concentrate on the theoretical roots of this. However, when they've succeeded in getting the 51% of the electorate as socialist, there'll then be an election which will result to in their own words, the democratic dispossession of the capitalist minority. And the capitalist, the forces at the capitalist disposal to resist this, such as the army and the police and the judiciary, will not be able to resist, because they too will have a majority amongst them in favour of socialism. So we have this idea that socialism can come about peacefully, there's no prospect of being killed, and there's no need of getting blood on our hands. Now, the CWO thinks this is untrue. This is a completely utopian fantasy. We think the capitalist class would be able to resist with their armed mercenaries and hired retainers. They would be able to resist indefinitely any attempt to overthrow them using their own institutions, such as Parliament. However, the SPGB thinks that the majority of the working class and the mercenaries and hirelings will come to a communist understanding of society and of their position under capitalism. We say this is impossible. To develop communist consciousness under capitalism is possible only for a minority. Now, why do we say this? To answer this, we've got to look at the basic Marxist view of consciousness, which stems from the Marxist view of the world, which is materialism. Now, that's what I'm going to do in the rest of my introduction. Now, Marxists are materialists. We believe that the physical world is the ultimate reality, that the ideas we have in our heads are, in the last resort, a reflection of the material world which we have perceived through our senses. I don't think anyone here would argue with that. In a similar way, we hold that social ideas derive from the material world. Social ideas derive from the material structure of society, that is, the economic structure, the structure which we experience in our everyday lives. For example, every day we experience selling our labour power to capitalists, exchanging wages for food, for clothing, for housing. And we experience these things as facts in the same way as we experience the forces of nature. And to most people, these conditions of life which we experience appear as something natural or something normal, whereas in fact they're not at all. In feudal times, the way we live today would have seemed totally absurd, and the same would have been the case in slave society. Now, Marx says in the German ideology, from which I'm going to quote quite a lot tonight, he says, "Consciousness can never be anything else than conscious existence, and the existence of men is their actual life process." So that's the first point, that all the ideas we have, the social ideas, have a materialist basis in the structure of society. However, the ideas we have are not simply passive reflections of material reality. Experience which we have is restructured and interpreted by the other ideas which we have in our heads. From the start of our lives, we experience the ideas of the capitalist class, which is presented to us in books, in newspapers, in television, on the radio, etc. And these ideas fundamentally amount to nothing more than a justification of the status quo of capitalism. Of saying that this is the natural system which exists, it's in your own interests, anything else would be worse, to try and change it is hopeless. And consequently, the facts of daily life, such as pay cuts, bad housing, unemployment, etc., are in general interpreted within the framework which is provided by the capitalist class. Further, the ideas which we have are conditioned by what has happened in the past, and they are also conditioned by the social environment we live in at present. For example, the ideas of workers in Britain are entirely different. Well, they're not entirely different, but they're different in an obvious way from those of workers in a country like South Africa, simply because of the different evolution of capitalism in these two countries and the different social environments. So, the dominant ideas are based on the productive relations in society, which means they're based on the economic structure of society, plus the interpretation of this structure and these relations, which in general, or rather which inevitably, is that interpretation provided by the ruling class. Now, as Marx said, in the German ideology, again, I'm going to quote, he said, "The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, i.e., that class which is the ruling material force in society is at the same time the ruling intellectual force. The class which has the means of material production at its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack the means of mental production are subject to it. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships, the dominant material relationships grasped as ideas, hence of the relationships which make one class the ruling one and the other one the dominant one." Thus, in general, the majority of the working class will be dominated by bourgeois ideas. As long as capitalism exists, this will be the case, and we cannot escape from this any more than a man can jump over his own shadow. This is an inescapable conclusion of the materialist understanding of consciousness. In fact, I think we can say that Marx himself was so convinced of this that the only way he saw in which the working class could escape from the domination of bourgeois ideas was in revolution itself. He wrote again, "Both for the production on a mass scale of this communist consciousness and for the success of the cause itself, the alteration of men on a mass scale is necessary, an alteration which can only take place in a practical movement, a revolution. This revolution is necessary, therefore, not only because the ruling class cannot be overthrown in any other way, but also because the class overthrowing it can only in a revolution succeed in ridding itself of all the muck of ages and become fit to found society anew." Well, that, we believe, is a materialist explanation of why the ruling ideas in society are those of the capitalist class. Now, what about communist ideas? Well, although in general the ruling ideas will be those of the ruling class, capitalist society is a class-divided society in which there is a process of class war at work.